Welcome. Today we're at Stanford University, and I'm talking to Dan Schwartz, who's a professor at the School of Education, and he's an expert on learning technologies and assessment, and we'll be talking to him today.
Thank you.
So, Dan, could you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what your background is?
My undergraduate degree was in philosophy and anthropology and English, and I ended up teaching. As soon as I got out, and I taught, and I got Young Teacher of the Year award in Los Angeles City Schools, very hard. And then they ran out of money, so I got laid off. And then I taught in Alaska for 5 years in an Indian village, and the computer showed up, and it turns out that's what philosophy is good for. I knew how to program very quickly. And I thought, well, I can make better stuff than I see coming in, and so that's what I've been trying to do for the past ever. My niche in the world is that I can bridge sort of very basic research like in neuroscience and sort of classroom sensibilities and design good classroom instruction. And the thing that I do that's relevant for this is that I'm very good at deciding exactly what is it that people should be learning, or other people tell me what they should be learning, and then I interpret that, right, and say, oh, if that's the case, they should learn this, which means I probably need to teach this way, and I need to measure it the right way. So a lot of people take measurements like standardized tests very seriously, and they trust them, and they don't actually know what goes into those tests. So I spend a lot of time worrying about making sure that we're measuring what we really mean to be measuring.
Well, that relates to a question my colleague Mitch Resnick has said, that oftentimes we value what we can measure rather than measuring what we value. How do you think about that in terms of your own work?
Well, I would agree with this. The question is, who's the we? Right? So we, educators, spend a lot of time arguing about what's valuable to learn. The outside world, like neuroscientists, they just give me a test. Right? I want a test that measures whatever the construct is that you say is important, and they don't worry about it. And so they end up getting things that are easy to measure and reliable. And then, of course, that's what you see on the achievement tests and things that become very important for stakeholder decisions. And then suddenly that's what kids think's important and stuff. But the people working in my area, at least, spend a lot of time saying, well, how could we measure that? Are there new ways to measure things that we care about?
So let's start off with how do you think about measurement and assessment? Can you define those?
Assessment is slightly different than measurement. So I might measure sort of how well a kid understands a ratio, right? And I might use one measure or the same kind of measure like 3 times, have them do 3 problems. Assessment is where you're using lots of different measures to sort of make a profile or a portfolio, and so it's often more ambitious, you know, to say, I have an assessment of your personality type. Right, and then you would have lots of different things that you would want to bring together to say, is there such a thing as that personality type? And are all these different measures cohering to make a fair assessment of it? So measurement's easier.
So how does some of your work sort of impact those kinds of things that we can actually measure?
So, one of the best examples is something we came up called preparation for future learning. So most measures take a sequestered format. You're a jury. You're not allowed to use any outside resources, right? And so computer science courses tend to be that way. You know, if you talk to someone else, even during a problem, that's considered cheating. Of course, if you're in the real world and it's a hard problem, you don't talk to someone, you're an idiot. So we kind of changed that, thinking that, what's important here is not can they solve that specific problem, but what's important is are they prepared to keep learning? So in most of our assessments, we give them something to learn, and then we see how well they learn from that. So a good example of this that's relevant to, say, games and educational stuff is that a lot of video games that are sort of made for education aren't that interesting, right? They're basically ways to get kids to memorize stuff, and that's good. There are things that you really want to memorize to a high degree of efficiency, and low variability. But for other things, that it sort of takes away what video games are great at, which is telling stories, giving you compelling experiences. And the best video games, you're in a world, you're living in this world. So what we did is, rather than trying to stuff kind of the explanatory content of school into the video game, we made a video game where students could experience certain things in that world, and then afterwards we teach them as part of the assessment. And suddenly, it turns out this video game, which if we measured how much students learn directly, looks terrible. But if we measure how well they've been prepared to learn from regular instruction, suddenly the video game is very special. So here's the easiest thing to measure. You give someone a problem and you say, can they answer it, right? And so now you want to teach somebody something. So now you got the problem that you have to both create the instruction and you have to create the measure to pick it up, right? And so there's two places you could get it wrong. You could make bad instruction. Here, now there's three, because you create this video game, then you make this thing for them to learn from, and then you measure what they learn. So now there's three places you can make a mistake. So it may be hard.
So you've done some interesting work on what you call choice-based assessments. Can you explain what those are?
Yeah, so this is, I don't know if we're going to capture mind share with this, but listen to a lot of discussions about assessment, people in the informal space, teachers, parents, it's a democracy, and it's sort of, we began to realize that what people really want to do is put students in a position to make good choices about learning as they go forward from school. So we've started making little game-based assessments, they're 10 to 15 minutes, they're kind of fun, where students basically have to make choices. And the choices aren't right and wrong. The choices are sort of about different ways to go solve, to learn so you can solve a problem.
So you've done some interesting work on what you call choice-based assessments. Can you explain what those are?
Yeah, so this is, I don't know if we're going to capture mind share with this, but listen to a lot of discussions about assessment, people in the informal space, teachers, parents, it's a democracy, and it's sort of, we began to realize that what people really want to do is put students in a position to make good choices about learning as they go forward from school. So we've started making little game-based assessments, they're 10 to 15 minutes, they're kind of fun, where students basically have to make choices, and the choices aren't right and wrong. The choices are sort of about different ways to go solve, to learn so you can solve a problem. So for example, in one, the kids are hired to do the lighting for an animal singing show. And the animals there's certain colors they want to be shown at a certain time during their song. And so the players have to figure out how to set up the lighting. The difficult thing is light isn't like paint, right? So with light, it's red and green makes yellow, and then two reds and a green makes orange. This is sort of mind-bending, right? Because all your life it's been yellow, red, blue. So to help them learn this, we have two resources. One is they have a light mixing room where they can mix lights together and to see what colors they make. And then we have another one which is sort of a buyer beware catalog, and it has charts for light coloring. And half of them are about mixing paint, and half of them are about mixing light. And so we see how do kids go about learning so that they can set the lights correctly. And this is about the choice to engage in critical thinking. So critical thinking is the process by which you decide what to believe. And most assessments are like logical reasoning tests. We thought, no, it's the choice to engage in critical thinking that's the important thing. So the kids who go to these buyer beware catalogs, they're looking at them and they have to figure out which ones to believe, right? And so we're trying to see, are these kids choosing to engage in this, or are they just going to this experiment room and doing trial and error, right? And so it turns out, that the kids who do a lot of trial and error are the kids who aren't doing so well in school, even though they can make it through the game fine, right? It's not the game, you make it through the game regardless of your choices. The kids who spend a lot of time looking at the wrong catalogs are the ones who are doing the best in school. And so it's an interesting kind of measure, because we're sort of saying, hey, you got to get your kids to start questioning and looking at things and deciding what to believe. And maybe we can go explain to the kids, you didn't do this, and kids who don't do this aren't doing so well in school, so you could do this and this would change. And so we've made a whole bunch of these. One, you're designing a poster for a school fair for booths, and you get to choose what poster, and then we put in design tools so you can drag and put in text and stuff. Then your poster shows up in front of these 14 animals that are sort of the focus group, and they look at it, and then you choose 3 of them to give you feedback. And the 3 are sitting there, and above each one there's a box that says, I don't like and I like. I don't like, I like, and I don't like, I like for the 3 of them. And you have to click, do you want the I don't like or the I like?
Okay.
Right. So it turns out the kids who click the I don't like button actually learn more about design. So the feedback is context sensitive. It's actually telling them what's good and bad about their design. The feedback for the likes and the don't likes are equally informative. So there's kind of a deep psychological story here about negative feedback being more useful but more painful. But anyway, the kids who choose the I don't like button, the more you choose that, the more you learn. So it's a preparation for future learning and measure, right? Are you taking the behaviors that help you learn? Also turns out those are the kids who are doing better on the standardized tests by an R squared of about 0.4 or 16%. So the more negative feedback you seek, the better you're doing on the standardized tests. If you're seeking positive feedback, conversely, it's predicting you're doing badly, right? And so this is kind of a interesting measure. There's nothing out there like that, right? And so we think looking at these choices and the choices that people make are probably more indicative of how they're going to learn in the future and their fate, and it's the place where you would sort of want to help them as opposed to a steady diet of just memorization and these are the facts. So anyway, you know, I think this is, there's a book that we wrote on this that sort of lays out the argument for why choice is the construct of interest and sort of make the argument and say it predicts future learning better than the student's current knowledge. Whether this will have uptake, I don't know. You know, in the high stakes assessment world, probably not. It's like the most conservative enterprise in the world. But maybe in the classroom, it's sort of yielding actionable information, the kid's not seeking negative feedback, let them know. Kids who don't do this, you know, you don't learn as well. It doesn't hurt that much. Just go do it. Let me show you how to do it.